Edelweiss and CNBC TV 18 present Change India Season 3. The work begins now.
Hello, welcome to Change India. Investments, they say, are a function of expectations, and the Modi government has certainly changed expectations for the better. So what's holding back investments, and can Budget 2015 revive the investment rate and boost growth? Joining us to discuss this is Anil Jain, Managing Director of Jain Irrigation Systems, Richard Rekhi, CEO of KPMG India, Rujan Panjwani, Executive Director, Edelweiss Financial Services, and joining us from Delhi is Shubir Gokaran, Director of Research, Brookings India, and a former Deputy Governor of the Reserve Bank of India. Gentlemen, thank you very much for joining us. And now, before we get to you, let me just go across and get a cross-section of voices from corporate India on what they think and how they think this problem can be resolved.
I think the budget will be a good one. It will be a growth-oriented budget. I think the finance minister has room to work with, because subsidies will be much lower as a result of crude oil prices being down and even food prices being down. I think the opportunity for disinvestment will be very good. Stock market is holding up quite well. So overall, the finance minister will be able to take some policy decisions to incentivize manufacturing.
We have expectations in many areas. So even if you say start from agriculture, we expect that there should be more subvention on the term lending side rather than on the cash credit side, because we believe that capital needs to be created in agriculture. In respect of retail loans, we believe that there could be some more incentive given to first-time home owners.
It's going to be a very important budget for this government. It is going to give very strong signals internationally. The Prime Minister has, over a period of time, made some big announcements in terms of where he wants to give thrust to the economy. So announcements like Make in India, Swachh India, Digital India, Smart Cities, and a few others, which are the key themes which the Prime Minister has been repeatedly emphasizing on. I think a budget is a good instrument to reinforce these initiatives.
So there you can see it, expectations are running pretty high. Shubir, if I can come to you first. The Chief Economic Advisor speaks of it. Industry is asking for it. The answer to revive the investment rate and boost growth suddenly seems to be public financing of projects. The argument is that corporate India doesn't have the balance sheets to undertake any sizable investment, especially in infrastructure. So the government has to step in. Maybe they have to step in, but can they step in without letting go of fiscal prudence?
Yes, I think there are ways to do this. I certainly do not advocate the compromise on the fiscal responsibility trajectory. Maintaining the deficit within the targets laid out, I think, is very important for credibility, because once you let go of this, you never know which way it's going to go, and people are just going to become rather suspicious. But it is possible, I think, to do what I would call a sort of balance sheet arrangement, which is essentially whatever assets the government is selling, that has to go into the creation of other assets. So using asset sales, whether they're disinvestment or spectrum or anything else, I think has to be dedicated to creating other assets. And with infrastructure, the advantage is that you can leverage, which means the government can put this money into a framework, a structure, whatever you want to call it, as equity, and then borrow from the market, whether domestic or international, to sort of consolidate resources to put into infrastructure. I think the basic issue is that there is no way that the current model, the current PPP framework, is going to give us more infrastructure. It is just not working. We cannot go back to a private sector mode, because the private sector has clearly demonstrated that it does not have the capacity to bear the risk intrinsic to this sector. So we have to get back to public finance. That much is obvious. The question is, how do you do it without completely sabotaging fiscal consolidation? I think that's the middle ground that this kind of institutional arrangement should be looking to find.
So what you're advocating then is really pretty aggressive divestment and a search for new revenues or increasing the tax base. Just aside, we've just had the Finance Commission recommendation being accepted by the government. Now 42% of government revenues will evolve into the states. Will that in any way crimp the government's efforts to pump prime the economy, get money into infrastructure?
Oh, not at all, because when you give more money to the states, you're also absolving the central government of spending money on the various schemes that the states are involved in. So what you're doing is to take the onus from the central government to the state government. This is not a question of holding the central government spending constant and giving more money to the states. That rearrangement also has to be made.
All right, so let me just come to you, Anil. So clearly, I think the general consensus is that we need public investment. Now, but would you be worried that if the public investment is at the cost of the fiscal deficit? Because Shubhi seems to think that you can find other ways to do it. You don't have to, you can still stick to your 3.6% target and still go ahead and make those investments.
As an industry, because we deal in agriculture, I think we are looking for both things to be matched, right, and balanced. In a sense, in terms of agriculture, Prime Minister has said, "Har khet mein pani." Now, that means about 70 million hectares of area to be brought under irrigation. We would require $30 to $40 billion maybe over next 10 years. Where do those funds come from? Some of these funds can come from already from NREGA and other places. So they don't necessarily have to come at the cost of the fiscal prudence. Plus, you need to raise some additional long-term resources to address renewable energy issues within agriculture and also the access to the capital for the farmers. So all these 2 or 3 are very important to create capital and capital investment into agriculture and rural India that really can take India forward, because you saw in 2009-10 also rural India carried India during the whole global meltdown. But that situation is weak right now.
Okay.
That needs to be addressed through the capital investment.
If I can get you in, Richard, where do you stand on the whole pump priming? Do you think the fiscal deficit is sacrosanct? You need to see that at 3.6%. Otherwise, there is a certain loss of credibility.
Let's look at it in 2 parts. I think fiscal consolidation or prudence is one part. We should not sacrifice that. But having a fiscal deficit arising out of creating assets, where it's for capital expenditure, is not necessarily bad, because it will help create future revenues, and that's what the government is looking for. So I think there needs to be a balance, but not at the cost of fiscal prudence. I think because once the government has put out something to the international investors, to the community at large, I think it's time that we stuck by it. We can find other methods. There are ways in which one can discuss it later, or how one could look at few other ways in which one could raise money and actually use it. In fact, our entire employee provident fund and other kind of money that is available, how does that bring that into the system and actually use some of it? We can discuss it at some point of time.
Okay. And then the markets are going into the budget with pretty high expectations. Let's forget what's happened in the last couple of weeks. But otherwise, the expectations are very, very high. Would a declaration of a 3.9 or a 4% fiscal deficit for 2016 disappoint markets? Or are they more interested in investments coming in?
I don't think it's a particular number that will change things dramatically for the market, unless it's way off the 3.6. But if it's 3.8 or 3.9, as long as that is going into some sort of investment which fuels growth, the market will be, in our opinion, okay with that. I think what is more important for the market is to try and see if they can lay down a 5-year plan, a more kind of a roadmap on what is it when we talk of reforms, and what is it that they would like done with some kind of milestones. Because I think what has been the one, if there has been any disappointment until now, has been that while there is a lot of macro talk, there hasn't been as much on the ground. And that is what I think the market is looking for. Largely a roadmap with some big things that are addressed. Now, they don't need to be addressed today. I think everybody understands that things take time. But as long as there's an overall roadmap with milestones, the market should be all right.
Edelweiss and CNBC TV 18 present Change India Season 3. The work begins now.
You spoke about milestones and a roadmap. What milestones would you be looking at?
Well, I think this is a budget that needs to lay out a 3-year agenda on the taxation side, GST, direct tax reform, and so on. And on the expenditure side, commitments to investment, public investment, and the subsidy reform process. If I were to see some or all of those things in this budget, even with a 3-year horizon, I think it would provide me great comfort from a macro perspective.
the ability to generate new revenue ideas. We've spoken about divestment. Is there anything else you'd like to say?
Well, I think today this government has the good fortune of having an international dividend, so to speak. I think we're on the right side of the commodity cycle from where India sits. Crude at between 50 and 60 was unimaginable even 9 months ago. So we've got this kind of a windfall, which may or may not last. Like Subir said, you could plan for 60, 70, 80, whatever. But the fact is that today it's between 50 and 60.
And you've got money from coal auctions, spectrum auctions.
You've got all that dividend coming in. So the question is, how do you use that? And I think the crying need that everybody is seeing is the infrastructure, because it's been said and proven that the private sector is not going to be able to bear that burden alone. And public finances have to step in. In what form, in what fashion, how is it going to be crafted? I think that's where some of the innovative thinking can go in. But if that is addressed in this budget, I think that will also allow some of the other plans to materialize and fructify, including Make in India.
Before you make it, let's just talk a little bit about agriculture, because it is a little worrying. We touched upon the fact that rural demand in the last 2 or 3 quarters has been weak. One of the reasons is, of course, commodity prices. One, of course, has been MSPs haven't been increased. The other is, as you were pointing out earlier, the climate change. That is, we're seeing farmers suffering from crop damage because of the vagaries of the weather. What is the solution?
I think there are multiple solutions here. One, at the production level, you have to ensure water availability and also energy availability.
Okay, so that's infrastructure irrigation.
That's infrastructure and irrigation, which is very important. Focus on water use efficiency and productivity increase married together.
Okay, again government funded.
Second, also market related. In market linkage, you need to create more food processing in the country. So you need to incentivize through the taxes, whatever else you can do, because it can address the employment issue as well as the market linkage issue. And this whole, there is this conundrum in terms of you want inflation to be as low as possible, but you also want farmer incomes to go up. How do you address both of that? That can only be addressed through higher productivity and better distribution, including food processing.
Okay. So through hedging, through insurance?
And the most important is also insurance, because this whole climate change, the farmers do not have that ability to absorb these, and there's no government can control. This is beyond everybody. But through right amount of insurance or weather-based insurance available to all farmers with different agroclimatic regions, and one solution will not fit all, can then really solve this issue of the farmer lower income, the suffering which is there out in the rural India.
Okay. Manufacturing, can I move on to tax with you? Because the GST and GAR. One, are you hopeful that with the giveaways, if I can call it that, to states, both with the Finance Commission recommendation being accepted to an extent, even the coal revenues and royalties going back to the states, do you think that states will now get a little more forgiving on the GST rate? Maybe not 26, maybe they'll be willing now willing to come down, and that's one of the major roadblocks really.
See, I think first, I agree with you. I think the state should be a little more amenable than they were earlier, because they've got revenues now in their hands, which have gone directly to them, and with this Finance Commission kind of recommendation. But I think the more important thing is that I think the Finance Minister needs to lay out the roadmap for GST, because GST is not only going to, rationalize the tax, but it's going to change the way will create
the roadmap has been laid out for the last 3 budgets.
No. But
what would you like different this time?
He needs to put out when is this GST going to come out, and when are we going to have the states and the central actually agreeing to a GST rollout, because we keep delaying it, and if it's too much, if it's too diluted, it will lose its impact. I think GST in a very diluted form will not have any impact.
Subir, if I can just come to you on GST, the GST rate. I know it's not going to be decided on this budget, but clearly that's the point of contention at the moment. At 26%, is it going to work at all? Or as somebody told me, that almost every government that has introduced GST has lost the next election because prices have gone up after that. Do you think what we've seen today on the Finance Commission, increasing the share of states, the revenue share of states, do you think this will make states more amenable to a lower rate, a more workable rate?
Well, I think more than the revenue share, the important recommendation in the Finance Commission is in the report is the compensation formula. The Finance Commission is recommending 100% compensation for 3 years and then scaling it down to 70% or 75% and below. That should provide a little more comfort. On the rate itself, I mean, we look globally, I think the rate range is typically between 12 and 18% thereabouts, in the teens. So 26 to me seems a little high. And I think we have to, do some more detailed analysis of how much revenue buoyancy will be generated by a GST to decide on what the right rate is, because this may be something of a spoiler at this high rate, even though it now represents the consolidated rate that people pay at the center and the state level. But the whole point of changing the system is to get the same revenues at a lower rate, not at the same rate. I think that's going to be a challenge.
Edelweiss and CNBC TV18 present Change India Season 3. The work begins now.
Ranjan, you spoke on milestones. What milestone would you like? The complete abolition of GAR? Or?
Well, I don't think the market is as optimistic as that. But certainly, nothing new on GAR and some sort of a pushback on that. Certainly a date by which GST will be rolled out.
Okay. What will give sanctity to the date? Because we've heard dates in the last 3 budgets.
That is true. And I think a lot of it is also in the commentary. So we'll have to wait and see what the commentary is like and what the tone is like. Clearly, I think some amount of clarity on how public spending is going to happen in infrastructure. There are clear areas in terms of including power where, transmission and distribution are areas issues. I think capitalization of banks, public sector banks. So there are a host of things that the market is actually, looking forward to. And the thing is, everyone knows he's not going to be able to do everything in one shot.
But there's, again, that's the question I was going to end with. That there's a feeling of impatience that crept in. We've had voices, perhaps on the back of what's been the terrible last quarter that we saw. Industry has got impatient, and they say that it's been all talk and no action. Would you go as far as to say that, or do you think?
I wouldn't go as far as to say that, because from whatever we are hearing from our clients, and what we're seeing is there are things that are changing on the ground. Though I think, from a more macro level, I think what people are looking for is some more kickstart to growth. Okay. Because finally, it's all about growth.
Okay.
And,
Okay. So that's okay. Where are you on that? Is industry justified, or some parts of industry, is it justified in saying nothing has changed on the ground?
See, I think it would be a little unfair statement to say nothing has changed. Honestly, what he has done, 2 things. One, he has made the vision. So that vision was good to create a level of optimism. But the vision needs to be backed by a strategy which has to be implemented. I think that's where, and I think it's time maybe where industry and government actually come together to be able to, I'm not sure the government has all the answers. I'm not sure they exactly know how to do some of these things, because a lot of which they are planning to do is something new. You take 100 smart cities. I don't know where else in the world it has been actually done. Or you talk of some of the other campaigns, affordable housing. I think all this requires industry and government to come together to find a solution. One small point I would like to leave here, whether for funding this infrastructure, the government would like to consider and think of a development bank for infrastructure on the lines of what is in Brazil, where they have used actually the savings accounts of the private sector into this bank and has used that with a good mechanism to monitor. You don't NPAs getting created out of this, but to monitor it and run it. And maybe the time has come. Even China still has a development bank, I mean, despite where the economy is. So maybe one needs to consider a development bank for infrastructure could be a thought which they could consider going forward. Okay. As one more innovative idea one looks at.
Ms. Jain, how would you rate the performance of the government so far? Have nothing happened on the ground, or do you think that you're happy with what they've done with the constraints?
I think, to start with, we are not anticipating structural or, immediate changes on the ground, because what they're trying to do is changing some things which have been going on for a long time. and the effect is going to take some more time to come. So in that sense, to have that expectation something would immediately change, and what industry is facing today is of their own doing. So let's not blame the government for that in general.
So when you say own doing, you mean balance sheets that are overly...
The balance sheet, right. But I think structurally and directionally they are moving in a right way. But most important in this budget is to see right allocation of resources and infrastructure creation in rural as well as urban areas, which would kickstart economy.
Shubir, how would you rate these first 9 months of a government that came in with so much promise?
Other panelists talked about various schemes being put into motion. The Jan Dhan Yojana is not mentioned. That's an important one, bringing people into the banking system. Certainly the endorsement and reinforcement of Aadhaar, I think, is a very critical move. A number of actions on the agricultural front, both capping the procurement prices, which the previous government also did in its last cycle, and most importantly, selling down from stocks of rice and wheat. Both of these have contributed significantly to food inflation being brought down, which has reinforced the commodity price benefits. Now we have a number of schemes, each of which sort of stands on its own. I think we have to look for a weaving together of these to emerge with a sort of national strategy. I wouldn't call it plan, because planning has now become a bad word, but as national strategy, I think that is missing, and I think the budget is an opportunity to start working in that direction.
Shubir, thank you so much for that, gentlemen. Thank you so much for this wonderful conversation. So clearly, it's an old story. The problem, the solution we've known for the last 15 years is just about getting our act right on infrastructure. Let's wait and see what he does on February 28th. Thank you so much.
Edelweiss and CNBC TV 18 present Change India Season 3. The work begins now.